Now, in early January 2026, U.S. military forces executed a surprise operation in Venezuela that resulted in the capture of President Nicolás Maduro and his wife, who were subsequently flown to New York to face federal charges of narco terrorism. Now, the raid, authorized by the Trump administration, reportedly resulted in approximately 80 deaths and included a controversial U.S. announcement of intent to temporarily manage Venezuela's oil reserves. Now, this forcible extraction of a sitting head of state has triggered a major diplomatic crisis, with the U.S. justifying the move as a necessary strike against a criminal regime. African leaders and organizations, including the African Union, ECOWAS, and the governments of South Africa and Ghana, have strongly condemned the operation as a flagrant violation of international law and national sovereignty. They argue that this intervention sets a dangerous precedent reminiscent of colonial imperialism, where powerful nations feel entitled to military change foreign governments and control their resources. Now, while some isolated opposition groups as well in Africa viewed the caption as a warning to dictators, the continent's collective official stance has been to express solidarity with Venezuela and urge the United Nations to intervene against what they view as an illegal act of aggression. Now, joining us to make sense of this, we have Jonah Onuoha Isaac, Professor of International Relations and Diplomacy, University of Nigeria, Nsukka, in Enugu State. And we also have Alexander von Rugen, a global policy analyst in Amsterdam, Netherlands. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us at this time. Now, let's get straight to the heart of this. To begin with you, Jonah, speak to us. Let's start with the head of state immunity, because customary international law generally protects sitting leaders from foreign prosecution. So by ignoring this, what do you think? Has the U.S. effectively dismantled the concept of diplomatic immunity for the entire global South? Hello, Jonah.
Let's start with the concept of sovereignty. Sovereignty is the ability of a country to make and implement decisions without internal or external intervention. Sovereignty is one of the qualities of the state. It started in 1648 at the Westphalia Treaty. Sovereignty insists that no other country should dictate. Even citizens cannot dictate to the state. And therefore, the attack, the capture of Maduro is an abuse. It's an abuse of sovereignty and does not follow international law. And it has a reason. African states, they have a reason to be afraid. West Africans are afraid because if nothing happens, the next people to be captured will be in West Africa, particularly in the French-speaking areas like Niger Republic, Mali, Burkina Faso, where military coups have taken place. There is fear that France might try to capture those who carry this coup if nothing is done. And therefore, the issue of sovereignty is important and must be maintained for international law, to be able to operate.
All right. So, Alex, you heard Jonah. He called the capture an abuse, and that there's fear in West Africa, most especially. Now, the U.S. also points to the 1989 capture of Manuel Noriega in Panama. However, in 2026, with a more multipolar world, can Washington still rely on 20th century interventionist tactics without facing global isolation?
Yeah, there is a difference between...
No, I'm speaking to Alexander. Politics. Sorry, Jonah, I'm speaking to Alexander.
Okay, okay.
Trump's form of shotgun diplomacy, the world is obviously critical of it. The ECOWAS message or press release says they say they should respect the sovereignty of Venezuela. They're backing off on the denouncement of an illegal procedure here because Trump, although it could be argued he broke international law, there's a gray area because they didn't invade Venezuela. They didn't break its sovereignty. What they did is they did a Department of Justice action to apprehend an indicted criminal back from 2020, Nicolás Maduro, for narco-terrorism. That was done in 2020. An FBI agent attended. The military backed them up, so it's plausibly a Department of Justice action. Now, to say he was a head of state, well, the EU and many UN members had already denounced his legitimacy as president of Venezuela. So was he a head of state? He was a figurehead of state, but what was he there legally? That's the other question. So it's a plausible argument as to whether U.S. broke international law. Now, this has already been challenged in the courts. In 2018, Maduro made application to the Bank of England to release about $4.5 billion worth of gold they held on deposit for Venezuela. That went to courts. When Guaido won the official election in 2020 and was deemed as the official leader of Venezuela, but he never got to hold that position. He had to flee the country to save his life. It was challenged in British courts in 2023, and the court defined Maduro as the non-legitimate president of Venezuela, and therefore they held on to the gold and they did not release it. So this has already gone to court in terms of the legitimacy of his presidency. So for everybody to be in protest that America has broken the rules, it's a gray area here. Trump's position is, okay, we're going to apprehend him. We're not going to ask for permission. And if we're wrong, we'll beg for forgiveness. But America doesn't usually admit when they're wrong. The point is, how this plays out in the future will be based on the evidentiary package submitted in the U.S. courts against Maduro. Witnesses will come forward, whistleblowers will come forward, and it'll play itself out over the next probably year. The argument on breach of international law, that can be argued after the fact, much like it was when Noriega was apprehended. But you have to look at the motives of a lot of countries protesting here. People in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. And I'm sure there's a lot of leaders around the world that are sleeping with one eye open because maybe they're reassessing themselves as to how they've run their country. Are they running it with integrity? Are they doing it for the benefit of their citizens? This whole door that's being opened by Trump is, if you are hiding behind the curtain of diplomatic immunity and you're a bad guy and you're violating principles of good governance and loyalty to your people, you've got a target on your forehead now. And I think that's a justifiable concern for some people.
All right, let's hear if Jonah actually agrees with you. Jonah, please go ahead, because we're still talking about the legitimacy of Maduro. And I know legal scholars have also suggested that Maduro cannot avoid trial even if his abduction was illegal. So if the U.S. courts accept this, does it provide a blank check for future extrajudicial snatches of, foreign rivals?
Before I answer the question, let me state that there is no justification for what Trump did in Venezuela. On that note, there is the United Nations Charter, 2.4, certain issue of non-intervention, and it was meant to respect the sovereignty of states, to protect states, to ensure international peace and security. Even when there is issue of accusation of drug trafficking, even when issue of terrorism, there is no justification for Trump to intervene and capture a sitting president. Not even to talk about trying him in his court. What is happening is not international law. It is international politics. America have been doing the same thing over and over again and getting through with it. It is time for the international community to get together and stop him. Otherwise, third world war is imminent.
All right, Jonah, still on you.
American.
Okay, sorry, I thought you had landed. Please go ahead.
Yes, I'm saying that the world must get organized under the United Nations to stop Trump. If nothing happens, France might take the same action in West Africa. If nothing happens, Nigerian president may be captured. And therefore, there is no justification under international law while a sitting president must be captured. And therefore, I'm calling on the United Nations.
But Jonah, permit me to ask, is that necessarily a bad thing? Because we've seen so many West African, presidents extending their term from 2 terms to 3 terms.
I didn't get you.
I said, is that a bad thing, even if that is the case? Because we've seen so many. Can you hear me, Jonah?
Yes, I can hear you now.
All right, I was saying, you said we'll see that happening in Africa, and I was asking, I was actually asking if that is necessarily a bad thing, because we've seen, and there have been, concerns about so many West African presidents, or even African presidents, extending their term from 2 to 3 terms, or even, more. Is that necessarily a bad thing?
There's no reason, even if they extend their term, there's no reason another country can come and take out. Let us be very frank about international law and diplomacy. No state should intervene in the affairs of another country. Any country can use any excuse about overstaying in office, killing people, and then intervene and disrupt. There's no reason why America can do what it's doing. And the world must condemn this. That's what I'm talking about. Because if it doesn't happen, other countries can do the same. The best thing can be brought in. Now, you see what's happening in the French-speaking countries. They have all adopted military coup. And France is not happy. And France is watching. And if nothing happens, he will start practicing this stuff. There's no reason under the edge, including fighting terrorism, fighting drug war. There's no reason America should be allowed to do what it's doing. The UN must sit up.
All right, now you talked about the UN Charter. I want to know, because the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, expressed grave concern as well that rules were not respected. So would you say that the UN is now powerless to do anything more than issue statements, when a P5 member ignores the Charter?
Yeah, the UN is now basically a toothless bulldog. Because if you see what is happening in the Middle East, despite the various UN declarations, decisions, not implemented. And the problem has been the United States using veto on one way or the other. So the UN has failed to maintain international security despite all criticism. Otherwise, tell me, what is the UN doing after this? After Maduro has been captured, apart from condemnation? What has UN done in the Middle East? The primary purpose of UN is to implement international law. And Section 2.4 is very clear about non-intervention. It's very clear about respect of sovereignty. It's very clear about respect of territorial integrity. And the particular state is not of himself and going to capture other people and try them, and now we are arguing because they are abuses. What kind of abuses are we talking about?
All right, Alex, let's hear from you as well, as to why you think the UN hasn't done anything else other than, issue statements.
Well, that's, in this particular case, that's their job. They protest, they issue statements. Keep in mind, the U.S. is a founding member of the UN, and they have a veto power. So, they're not going to vote against themselves. They'll veto any action against them. Let's look deeper into how this came about. Russia, which was deeply embedded in Venezuela, there's a theory that maybe there was a deal cut between Putin and Trump to allow this to happen. Okay, Russia was heavily invested in Venezuela, but they also have an issue in the Ukraine. You know, maybe if Mr. Trump backs off on his demands on Russia and the Ukraine, Russia walks away from Venezuela. There were missile batteries set up in Venezuela, air defense systems, both with Chinese radar and Russian ordnance. There wasn't a single aircraft shot down in this operation. Are you telling me there's a naval embargo for 6 weeks around Venezuela? And one would conceivably think any armaments would be on high alert 24/7, yet no damage, no loss of life except on the security side of the Venezuelans. So I think there's much, much deeper political things going on. I would compare it to the meeting in Yalta before the end of World War II. The precedent was set there. President Roosevelt sat down with Joseph Stalin and Winston Churchill, and they divided up Europe before the end of the war. None of the other countries had any input or say in the matter, and Europe was divided up. Perhaps a similar meeting took place in Alaska in August of this last year, because coincidentally, that's when the activity got really ramped up in Venezuela. My colleague points out it's a violation of international law, but I think he's not reading into the gray area. If a leader is not legally in charge, if there were illegal elections handled in his own country, he's not really the leader of that sovereign nation. And if the world is watching you, let's look at the recent developments in Tanzania. And the revolt on their election. 92%, who wins 92% of the vote? Recent elections in Guinea, 84% of the vote. When my colleague mentions the threat of France coming in and then setting a precedent, France was kicked out of the Sahel because they weren't protecting the citizens from the terrorists and the jihadists. Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali band together. Coups were initiated to take out other governments that had been put in by previous coups for not defending their citizens properly. Is that the action of a tyrant? Getting rid of France because they weren't providing adequate protection? And not to mention, I think France was taking advantage. If we want to talk about neo-colonialist activities, I think the French probably have the worst record for colonialism. But that's the aside. The chances of them coming in and getting support to take over, they might try to do it covertly. Recently, there was another coup attempt on Captain Traoré in Burkina Faso this past weekend. Thank goodness it wasn't successful. It seems to be Africa is plagued with these things. I think ECOWAS's better position here, rather than make the statements, which they have to do, they should focus on their own governance as to what is actually causing these actions. I think the problem with a lot of these situations are two words: greed and ego. And it prevents the citizens from getting their fair share of life and safety. And if leaders focus on their own pockets as opposed to the needs of their citizens, under Machiavellian guidelines, they're going to be taken out. If a leader is respected, he can be feared. But if a leader is feared and hated, chances are a coup is going to take him out, or an assassin's bullet, or other nations are going to step in, using whatever rules of engagement they can twist the policy on. That's what's going to happen. It seems, unfortunately, in Africa, they've adopted a playbook of cheating on elections, manipulating the constitution for extended terms in office without the approval of their constituents. And they're not sharing the wealth to the people. The recent developments in Nigeria, with terrorist activities, Boko Haram. I think actually the way this is playing out with the President Tinubu, he's doing the right thing. And I don't see any U.S. forces invading Nigeria or attacking their sovereignty. I see them working together to get rid of a Nigerian problem, which has been free for 15 years. But.
All right, I think Jonah has something to say about what you have just said. Jonah, let's hear from you, because I've actually seen AU and the ECOWAS, coming out to, speak against and warn against, invading the sovereignty of Venezuela. We see an opposition split as well, because we also see some African opposition groups, supporting the move as a warning to dictators. So do you agree with Alex? Could this operation actually fuel domestic unrest or even coups across Africa?
Let me state that I'm not happy my colleague is justifying the coup, the capture of the sitting president under the pretext of bad governance. Those that have engaged in this capture wrong. And therefore, after alarmed.
All right, we seem to be having issues with Jonah's audio, but we'll definitely come back to you, Alex. So, Alex, let's speak about the Greenland connection, because reports also suggest that the administration is eyeing, the Danish Greenland. So, tell us, is the Venezuela operation a test case for a new era of, I think I have an idea of what you would say about this, but most people seem to think that it is a test case for a new era of U.S. territorial and resource acquisition.
Well, you can't compare apples to oranges. Venezuela has been a development for many years. Like I said earlier, an indictment was made in absentia against Maduro in 2020. Sanctions have been on Venezuela for 15 years. Maduro was challenged in an illegal election in Venezuela in 2019, 2020, where clearly the ballots were stacked in favor of Maduro. So the whole globe challenged that legitimacy of that election. And so if you're not a legitimate leader, how can you hide behind a curtain of diplomatic immunity? Okay. When we talk about Greenland, they belong to Denmark. Denmark is a NATO member. And as a result, if you go against Greenland, you go against NATO. America is also a NATO member. Now, unless Greenland has been invading America with polar bears as a point of national security, I don't think there's a reason. Now, for military strategy to protect the Arctic, which is what Trump is claiming, that should really be a joint venture between him and the government of Denmark, not a threat to take it over. So you're comparing apples to oranges.
All right. So now let's. I don't think we've been able to get Jonah back, but then let's quickly wrap up this conversation. And talk about the human casualty, because we know that the operation left roughly 80 people dead. Does the high casualty count undermine the U.S.'s narrative of a surgical law enforcement mission? And also looking at the fact that, the U.S. military is now inside Caracas, do we expect a new wave of refugees? Because we know that Europe has already absorbed some. Can the region actually handle more of this?
Well, if there's a liberation or a considered liberation of Venezuela, you've had 8 million people, 8 million Venezuelans leave Venezuela because of the atrocities under the Maduro regime. I think a lot of them will go back. they're elated in Miami. There's a lot of Venezuelans living in Miami that would reinvest in Venezuela. If there's a migration event out of Venezuela, it might be the Maduro supporters that are now going to be outnumbered, because I think there's been a silent opposition for years in the country. Now, the problem in the evolution of that change might be the thugs that were supporting Maduro that will turn to terrorist type activities within the country to try to destabilize it, much the same way that the FARC destabilized Colombia for years. Ironically, the ex-leader of the FARC is now the president of Colombia, and he's in Trump's rifle sights as well. But that's another story for another day, I'm sure. I don't think it'll be a migration issue. It'll be reverse migration, because if lifestyle and value goes back to Venezuela, I mean, it was the most prosperous country, top 4 in the world back in the 1950s. Rich country, natural resources. Maybe that's why Trump especially likes it. Oil is just one of them. The reinvestment in Venezuela and the reestablishment of currency values and elimination or reduction in inflation is going to make it a very appealing area. I mean, I can see tourism returning to the country, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry. It was one of the top tourist destinations in South America. Forget about oil, forget about resources, just tourism, which benefits the people from a direct perspective for service, retail, you name it. I see Trump's action moving 30 to 60 million barrels of stored oil, high quality oil right now in Venezuela, claiming it to be sold in the United States and giving it back to the people of Venezuela. Now, how he disperses it and how that plan takes effect, I think is going to be the final straw here as to how much support Trump gets with this action. Okay. People of Venezuela will applaud it. And it's very critical how those funds for 60 million barrels of oil worth multi-billions of dollars get dispersed, because that oil's an inventory. This is not going to take a long time to enact. I think that's going to be the barometer on how this entire process is received, both in America, in Venezuela, and globally.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time and for speaking on this. Mr. Jonah, we actually have you back. Okay, let's just give you 1 minute to have your final thoughts as well.
Trump's action in Venezuela has violated national law. The global community must condemn.
All right, so sorry, Jonah, we still cannot, we're not getting good audio from you, but thank you so much, gentlemen. Jonah Onuoha Isaac, Professor of International Relations and Diplomacy, University of Nigeria, Nsukka, and Alexander von Rugen, Global Policy Analyst in Amsterdam. Thank you so much for joining us once again and for your time.